An exhibit that combines things that aren't supposed to be combined. Entrepreneurship that nearly destroyed a valuable relic. A profession that left its mark on one of the most popular types of art of the times. The Museum of Theater, Music and Cinema of Ukraine. It started off with just 800 photos and photo negatives, and today it houses a diverse collection of art history monuments, which contains 300 banduras alone. Founded in 1923 by famous Ukrainian actors, today the museum glorifies theatrical art and more well beyond the shores of Ukraine. Its exhibits attract genuine interest from both local and foreign visitors. For example, the Slavutskyi Vertep. One of the calling cards of our Museum of Theater, Music and Cinema of Ukraine is its collection of verteps. That is, the visitors see them as soon as they set foot into the museum. They are located in the first hall, which describes the origins and emergence of theatrical art in Ukraine, and tells us about the very interesting and characteristic Ukrainian phenomenon of the folk puppet theater or vertep. A vertep chest that reminds more of an ordinary church. That's because in its design we see two red domes with crosses. These domes are translucent. They were used to insert candles and to light up the whole vertep, as it was often shown in the evening or in a dimly lit or even dark room. It was very bright and interesting. But at the same time, the chest that resembles a church also looks like a theater. There is a candle bra. There is a backstage where puppets appeared from and then went back in. These are the features of theatrical buildings and theatrical architecture of that period. As for the puppets themselves, only one was preserved in this vertep. Very few puppets are on display in the exhibition. In particular, there is only the figurine of Peter the Apostle at the top. According to the Bible, he was the apostle who was given the keys to heaven. He opened the gates for those people who went to heaven after they had been judged. To our great regret, it came into our possession without the puppets. There is only one puppet in this vertep. It is Saint Peter who holds the keys to heaven. Despite the small number of puppets, this vertep is still fairly interesting and very different from classical Ukrainian verteps. Our Slavutskyi Vertep was made in the second half of the 19th century. It originates from Western Ukraine, so the Polish shopka tradition is already strong in it. This one has 3 scenes and not 2, which is traditional for Ukraine. That is, there is heaven, earth and purgatory. But these are far from all of the unique features contained in the Slavutskyi Vertep. What else is interesting about this artifact? Why does the church resemble a theater? And how does the Ukrainian chest made in Polish shopka traditions differ from this shopka? For a long time, the vertep or nativity scene was one of the crudest and yet at the same time most interesting phenomena of the Ukrainian theater. This was back in the days when it was just becoming professional. The folk tradition of singing carols at Christmas definitely influenced the appearance of the vertep, a specially crafted 2-story chest. And not only. The Vertep performance is by and large related to the Christmas tradition, because the Vertep itself takes its origins from the church. From the 13th century, static figurines of the Virgin Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, surrounded by livestock, were set up near Catholic churches. They were static, made mainly out of wood, and were called puppets in the name of Virgin Mary. Sometime later, they were moved into the interior of churches. The puppets were no longer static and moved with the help of puppeteers. Such performances were called theatrical mystery plays. But over time, non-canonical characters began to appear. For example, an old man and woman who performed comic sketches.
Що тобі треба? Заплати мені.
Church priests did not like the Vertep, so such performances were forbidden inside churches. The Vertep lived in full beyond church walls, in the hands of ordinary people. The Vertep as a phenomenon is popular in many countries. It is particularly well known in Poland, where it is called szopka, from the German word for barn.
Як ся маш, моя варшавянко? Будь здоров, мій коханко.
In Belarus, it is known as Batleika, from the name of the city of Bethlehem, where Jesus Christ was born. Verteps are also known in Italy and France. But Verteps in Ukraine are the most spectacular. By comparison, the Polish szopka retains a certain static nature even to this day. The figurines of the Virgin Mary and Jesus surrounded by livestock remain static.
Якого коня? Ну, щаслива гривонька.
In Ukraine, these puppets were very mobile and dynamic. With the help of puppeteers, of course, who created verteps with cutouts where these puppets moved, so accordingly the performance was very rich. They sang, danced, and some puppets even fought among themselves. That is, it was all fairly interesting and dynamic. This phenomenon was quite popular in Ukraine. There is evidence that the Vertep developed in Russia and Belarus under the influence of the Ukrainian Vertep. So the height of popularity of Verteps was in Ukraine. Ancient puppet arts and the ritual custom of walking with a star on a stick led to the appearance of Vertep and its puppet manifestation. Although there are known cases of the so-called live Vertep, where people perform the roles instead of puppets. Verteps themselves differ from each other by design and the scenes that were played out on the lower floor. The Slavutskyi Vertep is further confirmation of that. This can be seen due to several factors. The Slavutskyi Vertep has been known since the second half of the 19th century. It belonged to a priest by the name of Yakov Ratkovsky, who was in charge of an orphanage. To somehow entertain the kids, he decided to create a Vertep with puppets and show children those performances. As I've already said, Vertep makers often made them being guided by their own views, thoughts, and beliefs. Since Yakov was a priest, his Vertep design was very interesting, because he made it look like a church. By the way, Yakov Ratkovsky was a Uniate priest. He was a priest of the church created as a result of the unification of the Orthodox and Catholic churches based on the union under the primacy of the Catholic Church, but with the preservation of a significant number of Orthodox rites. That might be the reason why the tradition of Polish szopka is so strong in the Slavutskyi Vertep. This Vertep is also really well decorated. It might seem simple, but at the same time it looks interesting. In particular, we see these floral ornaments. In addition, the Vertep is also decorated with golden fringe. There are wood carvings and candles too. They were lit during the performance and contributed a lot to the overall look of the scene. The back walls of the Vertep were also decorated in an interesting way. For example, they could have been either just landscapes or biblical scenes. Everything is fairly simple in this Vertep. It's just gold-colored paper. But when the candles were lit, this paper glittered brightly, which really impressed the audience. It was none other than a Ponomar who lit the candles, a puppet character, not a real one. Unfortunately, it wasn't preserved to this day. Apart from the fact that very few puppets of the Slavutskyi Vertep were preserved, just one, it is also different from the puppets of other verteps. For example, the Sokorynsky and Kupiansky verteps, which are also exhibited in the museum, don't have a St. Peter figurine at all, or the Ponomar figure mentioned above. Then why did they appear here? In this vertep, the vertep creators were naturally guided by a certain tradition, but each of them did something new. They could alter the text, add puppets, create new characters, so it was all very dynamic, and no one put any restrictions on the vertep makers. They could use their imagination, so naturally new characters could appear over time. If we were to make a vertep today, we could create some very modern characters. That is why all verteps are different. That's normal and logical, and they were interesting because nobody knew in advance what they would be seeing and hearing.
Ми дуже раді перебувати на гостині юдейській землі.
Але ми глибоко стурбовані з приводу умов перебування народженого Спасителя світу. І що?
Ми просимо керівництво юдейської держави проявляти більше турботи до новонароджених.
Here you can see that the puppets of the Sokorynsky Vertep are different from those of the Kupiansky Vertep, even though the characters are the same. So this is how the Uniate priest Yakov Ratkovsky entertained orphans, but the orphanage was closed some time later. The vertep was bought by a certain Avgustinovich. There was much more work for the vertep from then on because the new owners staged performances in different villages, on farms, and on the estates of landowners. He staged so many vertep performances, and he overloaded the box so much that it broke. He then restored it back to its original form. That happened in the city of Slavuta. The city also in the Rivne district was multinational at the time. Ukrainians, Poles and Russians lived there. That had influence on the course of performances of the Slavutskyi Vertep. For example, there was no clear distinction between biblical and secular parts. In addition, the ground floor was moved closer to the viewers. That is, this vertep was more like a theatrical stage. This vertep is also very interesting because it demonstrates the evolution of this phenomenon. The second half of the 19th century was a period when theaters were being built in all large cities of Ukraine, and this particular vertep resembles such a theater. Avgustinovich wrote down the text and notes of the musical accompaniment of this performance in 1897. It differed significantly from other verteps on display at the museum. The language of the Slavutskyi Vertep is filled with Church Slavonic, Polish and Russian expressions. That shows how multinational the city was where it was being performed. In addition, the action, music and choral singing partially replaced the text of the drama. But there's nothing surprising about that, since the Slavutskyi Vertep was created by a priest. But it was all the harder for the Vertep to adapt to new realities when persecution of faith began in the Soviet Union. In the end, the Vertep found its place in the museum. If I remember correctly, the Slavutskyi Vertep was transferred here from the Historical Museum in 1932. Today, the Slavutskyi Vertep continues to amaze visitors with its uniqueness, history and originality. At the same time, it enlightens them. After all, it is one of the few surviving verteps, which is evidence of the emergence and development of theatrical art in Ukraine. And even at the dawn of its existence, it gave our country celebrities on a world scale.